The rain made a silver river along the diner's window, and Tamsin Cole watched it slip down the glass as if the sky were pouring out its pockets to count whatever coins were left. The breakfast rush had thinned to a scatter of truckers hunched over pancakes, a road-weary couple sharing quiet coffee, and an old man who nursed his oatmeal like it might tell him a secret if he took long enough. Tamsin's feet ached the way they always did by 10 a.m., but she kept her smile soft, the practiced easing of a woman who'd learned that kindness could be as invisible as air and just as necessary. She knew the regulars by how they folded their napkins, how they held their forks when the world was too heavy for words. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. That was why she noticed the two kids at the door before the bell even rang, not because they made a noise, but because they didn't. They were drenched and trying to pretend they weren't, thin shoulders turned sideways to the rain, like if they could make themselves narrow enough they'd slide past every eye in the room. The boy had a way of keeping himself slightly in front of the girl without making a scene of it, and the girl kept sneaking glances at the pie case the way a thirsty person looks at a knife, wanting, but wary of what it might cost. Tamsin moved before her brain caught up. Table or booth, she asked, voice light as steam, and the boy's head snapped toward her like a deer hearing a twig. Just waiting for someone, he said, too quickly. His hair stuck to his forehead in wet commas. He couldn't have been more than 11. Tamsin nodded as if this made perfect sense. We keep the coffee hot for people waiting, she said, stepping aside so they could come in without being on display. I've got a corner booth that's warm. You can sit till they arrive. She didn't finish the sentence. There's a way kids carry words when they're untrue, like a backpack with nothing inside. The manager, Leon, made a small sound behind the counter, the kind of throat clearing that carried a spreadsheet in it. Tamsin ignored him. She slid 2 waters onto the table, each with a lemon wedge as if she were setting down a treasure, and set a napkin between them like a bridge. I'm Tamsin, she said. If you need anything. The boy nodded again but kept his eyes on the table. The girl splayed her fingers on the napkin and drew an invisible line down the center. I'm Ada, she whispered, as if she were admitting a secret. This is my brother, Luca. Nice to meet you, Ada and Luca. Tamsin dropped her voice so it wouldn't carry to the counter. We have pancakes shaped like clouds if you squint. They don't say that on the menu, but it's true. Luca swallowed. We don't have money, he said. There it was, loud because it was honest. Tamsin's chest tightened, and she felt the singular tug of a memory that didn't arrive as an image, only as pressure behind her ribs. She kept her face easy. Happens to the best of us, she said. Cloud pancakes are on me today. Leon's head came up as if someone had tugged on a string tied to his hairline. He didn't say anything, not yet, but she could feel the lecture building like heat under a skillet. Tamsin pivoted toward the kitchen with a smile that had stopped fights before they started. She slid through the swinging door, caught Chewy's eye on the line, and tapped the ticket bell twice, their private code. 2 clouds, she said, voice low. Make him look like a sky had a good day. Chewy eyed her, then the dining room. He had 2 daughters and a softness that he tried to hide under sarcasm. Clouds cost money, he muttered, already ladling batter. Put it on my shift meal and the difference on my tips, Tamsin said. I'll make it up. Again? He made it sound like an accusation. It wasn't. It was a mirror. Again, she said. They need to eat. When she slid the plates onto the table, a mountain of pancakes with butter like a small sun and blueberries scattered like almost stars, Ada's eyes went bright enough to warm the rain right off her cheeks. Luca stared at the fork as if he were afraid it would disappear if he moved too quickly. You gotta eat while they're warm, Tamsin said, tipping the syrup just enough to let it kiss the top pancake. Syrup has a short attention span. The first bite untied something in the room. Ada made a sound that might have been a laugh if it weren't so careful. Luca's shoulders lowered. The old man at the counter pretended to keep reading his newspaper but didn't turn the page for a long time. The road-weary couple shared a look like maybe the day could still be kind. It was the kind of quiet that arrives after a decision is made. Tamsin kept moving, coffee refills, a ginger ale for the trucker with the cough, extra napkins for the kid in the Batman hoodie who always wore his syrup like a badge. She didn't look at Leon, and Leon didn't call her over, which meant the conversation would happen at the worst possible time later. When the pancakes were half gone, Tamsin slid into the booth for exactly 1 minute, the way you do when you're trying to be unmemorable. "You two got a place to be after this?" she asked softly. "Yeah," Luca said, "too fast. We're good." He angled his body slightly between Tamsin and Ada. It was subtle, it was everything. Ada swallowed and whispered into the safe space between them. "We're going to see a friend." "Good friend?" Tamsin asked. Ada's lashes fluttered like she was counting. "A grown-up," she decided. It wasn't an answer, it was a weather report. Tamsin nodded. "Okay." She slid a small paper sack onto the table the way a magician palms a coin, quick, gentle, expecting nobody to notice. Inside were 2 apples and a ham sandwich cut diagonally because nothing important should be hard to eat. "For later," she said, standing as Leon swung out from behind the counter with dish towels and a sermon. "Tam," he said quietly when she reached the service station. Leon used to be kinder before the owner started visiting more often. Now every kindness had to be paid for with an apology. "We can't comp whole meals for every stray who wanders in." "They're not strays," Tamsin said, still organizing silverware so she wouldn't do something stupid like cry. "They're children who are hungry." "Same difference to the receipts," Leon said. His mouth made a line that wanted to be a frown but settled for exhaustion. "You're a good person. I'm not trying to break that. But we keep the lights on with money, not with good intentions." Tamsin lifted her eyes. "Do we keep our humanity on with money too, Leon?" He flinched. "Don't do that," he said. "Don't make me the villain." "I'm not," she murmured. "I'm making breakfast." The bell above the door tinkled and a gust of wet air rolled through. By the time the 2 kids slipped out, the apples tucked into Ada's coat and the sandwich hidden under Luca's sweater, the old man at the counter had put a 20 under his bowl and walked out without waiting for change. The road-weary couple left another 5 on top of their tip. Leon saw it and said nothing, which was its own kind of yes. After the lunch rush, after she counted out the drawer and reset the pie case and stacked cups into towers that looked like fragile cityscapes, Tamsin stepped out into the parking lot. The rain had lost its edge and was coming down as a fine mist that made the world look blurred at the corners. She'd left her umbrella at home to save on bus fare, dry or punctual, choose one, and so she tilted her chin up and let her face collect the cool. She had been 19 when she first put on the green apron. Now she was 27 and her life had learned the shape of repetition: the bus with the sticky seat near the window, the diner, the studio apartment 2 flights up that always smelled faintly of laundry and cigarettes no matter how much she cleaned. Her mother called on Sundays from a town 2 states over when she needed to talk but not to listen. Tamsin didn't mind. People's needs were maps. She had learned to read them. The bus ride home took 40 minutes that day because a tractor-trailer jackknifed it on the freeway and the detour wove through neighborhoods that looked like somebody had set down a handful of houses and walked away. Tamsin watched them pass the way you watch stations on a radio you can't stop on, snatches of other people's lives, clear for a moment, then gone. A girl in a red coat jumped over a puddle with her arms thrown wide as if she might keep flying if she pretended hard enough. A woman smoked on a balcony in a shirt that said "Prayer changes things," flipping ash into a potted plant that had given up its leaf ghost months ago. When she reached her stop, the rain had turned back to a steady insistence. Tamsin climbed the stairs, feet silent on habits, and fished the skeleton key from her pocket. She paused in the hall outside her door, turned her head, and listened for the soft resentments she'd come to recognize: Mrs. Tilden's TV humming 2 doors down, Mr. Alvarez arguing with a soccer game, the faint sound of someone practicing saxophone in 3B, a lonely instrument that sounded like it might cry for you if you let it. Her apartment smelled like dryer sheets and hope. She set the kettle on, peeled off her damp socks, and leaned her hip against the counter while the water decided who it wanted to be. On the fridge hung a single photograph, a Polaroid of Tamsin at 19, hair in a brazen ponytail, her smile a promise she hadn't learned yet how to keep. Next to it was a sticky note with the words "Trust the small things" written in blue ink. The note had been stuck there so long the corner had begun to curl like a shy ear. She drank tea and looked at the window as if it could answer a question she hadn't asked yet. The rain's drum softened. Somewhere a siren spoke and didn't finish its sentence. That night, she dreamed of a boy and a girl walking away from a diner under a sky you could see through if you squinted, both of them leaning into the wind like it owed them a favor. When she woke, something in her chest felt both lighter and more accountable. The next morning, the sky moved on and the sun went about its business like nothing dramatic had happened. Tamsin bussed the tables left over from the breakfast rush, tied her apron tighter, and made the kind of small talk that keeps hearts from rusting. She didn't see Luca and Ada again that week, or the week after. The sandwich had gone out of her inventory and into a story she would never hear the ending of. She told herself that was okay. Kindness isn't a contract, it's a gift handed to the future in case it gets lost on the way. The days braided into something sturdy, a payday that never stretched the whole month, Chewy's bad jokes, Leon's math, the trucker with the cough finally going to a clinic after she put a flyer in his hand and waited while he read it twice. Tamsin didn't mind being the person everyone called when something needed fixing that wasn't a machine. Some people build bridges out of steel, she built them out of attention. You'd be surprised how much weight those can hold. In the fall, the owner came in more often, and every staff meeting turned into a ledger wearing a smile. Guest experience, he would say, with the enthusiasm of someone trying to sell fireworks to a damp field. Hospitality. Upsell the pies. Tamsin nodded, wrote down blueberry/ice cream on her order pad as a reminder, and kept giving the trucker extra lemon when his cough was bad. The world asked her to be many things at once, she had become good at being plural. On Tuesdays, she took the bus to the library's back room for the GED study group she signed up for twice and backed out of once. The room smelled like old paper and pencils trying their best. A retired teacher named Mrs. Klein ran the group with the kindness of a person who had learned that preparation is its own kind of love. "You don't need permission to know more than you did yesterday," Mrs. Klein would say, tapping the worksheets like a drummer coaxing courage from a table. Math came back to Tamsin the way seasons do, slow and then all at once. She found something almost addictive in balancing equations, in the way both sides of the line had to agree to be true. At night she would work a problem 3 different ways just to see if it would start behaving. Some things in life you can't set equal, no matter how hard you try. Variables kept their secrets. Still, for an hour 3 nights a week, order existed and waited for her to write it down. One Tuesday in November, a volunteer asked the group to write a letter to their future selves. Tamsin stared at the paper like it might bite. The request felt arrogant, like leaving instructions for someone you'd never meet. But she wrote anyway, a page about wanting to be useful, about not knowing if there was a name for the job she seemed to be doing in other people's lives, about wondering whether there might be a way to be paid for what she was good at without having to apologize for it. She tucked the letter into an envelope with no stamp and wrote, "Open when you forget why." It went into the side pocket of her bag and lived there like a small lighthouse. Winter cracked open like a bone and let the cold out. The diner stayed busy because grief and pancakes both love company. The trucker's cough eased. The old man stopped coming for a while and then returned looking thinner, like time had siphoned him. He told Tamsin his wife had passed and let the tears stand in his eyes without shame. She topped off his coffee and left her hand on the counter near his like a place he could land. In January, the heat went out in her building for 2 days, and she slept in a sweater under 3 blankets, thinking about heat as an idea more than a temperature. Chewy lent her a space heater that sounded like a small plane taking off and said, "Bring it back so it can bother my wife instead." She did, with muffins she'd bought on sale and warmed in the oven to make the apartment smell like someone had baked. By spring, the GED class felt less like a risk and more like a bridge she'd already started walking across. Tamsin painted her fingernails for the first time in years, cheap pale pink that chipped by the end of a shift, flaking like a decal on a suitcase. The color looked like a promise she wasn't going to make, and she liked it anyway. She didn't tell anyone about the kids. Not because she was afraid Leon would dock her pay again, he had, and it had stung, but because the memory felt private, a small sacred thing that might stop working if it had to answer questions. Sometimes, at red lights on the bus, she'd watch a brother and sister cross the street and wonder. Luca's watchfulness had hit her in a place she didn't know how to name. Ada's hunger had been only partly about food. The diner got a new dishwasher in May, a kid named Porter who wore his headphones around his neck even when they were off. Tamsin taught him the secret corners where suds like to hide and told him stories about lemon wedges curving to fit the glass just right. He listened like it might matter someday and came back the next day with questions. People learn differently when they suspect they're being seen. Summer rolled heat like dice. Tamsin started keeping a few bottles of water in her bag to hand to people at the bus stop whose throats looked like paper. She bought a little notebook and began writing down names and days. Mrs. Alvarez in 3B needs help carrying groceries on Thursdays. The guy at the stoplight near the pharmacy is Tommy and he likes the grape kind. The new girl at the nail salon wants to practice English on Tuesdays and will trade a polish for conversation. It didn't make her money. It made her. One bright morning in July, a woman came into the diner carrying a notebook and asking strange, big questions. What would you do if you didn't have to worry about rent? What problem in your community keeps you up at night? Leon hovered suspiciously. Tamsin answered carefully, the way she had learned to tell the truth in pieces. After the woman left, Chewy said, "Don't talk to people with clipboards. They're either saving you or selling you." Tamsin laughed and wrote the quote on a napkin and stuck it in her pocket. Some wisdoms wear dishwater. In the fall of that year, Tamsin passed the GED. She held the paper in her hands like it was heavier than it looked. Mrs. Klein clapped and cried and said, "I knew you had it," and Tamsin let herself believe that maybe the line between what you could do and what you had done was just waiting for a shoe to step over it. She took herself out for a cheap bowl of pho and raised her chopsticks like they were a toast. The letter in her bag stayed sealed. She didn't forget why. Not yet. Years do that thing good rope does, intertwine. She learned the regulars' grandkids' names, when to pour decaf instead of regular without being asked, which pie turned broken days right side up, cherry, mostly. She started a small emergency jar in her cupboard and fed it $5 bills the way you feed a stray until it trusts you. Once, in winter, she gave the whole jar to a neighbor who needed a bus ticket to a safe place. The jar looked naked on the shelf afterward, but the space it left felt like a window. At 29, Tamsin fell in love with a carpenter who came in on Thursdays for the meatloaf special and left sawdust everywhere like a glitter he didn't know he was wearing. His hands were good at apology and cabinets, his laugh arrived quickly and left slowly. They shared weekends and potholders, the comfortable choreography of two tired people making something that felt like a yes out of a world that mostly said maybe. It lasted until it didn't. Not with a slammed door but with a quiet there you are look that meant they had reached the edge of their map. They hugged at the threshold and thanked each other for not wasting any more time. Breakage, done right, can be clean. Tamsin learned to fix her own leaky faucet by watching a video twice and believing in the stubbornness of her own hands. She painted a wall in her apartment a color like the inside of a seashell because some days you need to stand inside something soft. On Sundays, she started reading the kids at the library, picture books with odd corners, and tried out voices that made them snort orange juice through their noses. She hadn't seen Ada and Luca since that morning. Still, now and then, when a girl with too large coat sleeves reached for the sugar, or a boy ate fast with his shoulders up, the memory returned like a note tucked under a door. She didn't twist it into prophecy. She let it be what it was, the truth of a day when choosing had been simple. When she turned 32, the diner threw her a cake with blue icing that stained everyone's tongues, and Leon made a speech that involved too many numbers and not enough adjectives, but it ended with, "We're better because you're here," and it sounded like he meant it. Chewy hugged her as if silly string were a human emotion. Tamsin took her slice home on a paper plate and ate it at the sink, letting crumbs fall like confetti into yesterday's dishes. That spring, a little boy started coming in with his grandmother for early dinners on Fridays. He wore a cape every time and called himself Night Falcon. He was 5 and took the job seriously. Tamsin made him a badge out of foil and wrote Night Falcon Unit 1 on it with a Sharpie. He saluted her every time he left, solemn as a judge. Little dignities matter, the small crown on the inside of the head stays polished by such things. One evening in late autumn, a storm rolled in with shoulders. Thunder moved across the sky like furniture. The diner lights flickered twice and steadied, as if the building had taken a breath and decided to go on. A family of 4 with damp jackets came in laughing, their shoes squeaking in chorus. 2 men at separate tables both asked for the last slice of lemon meringue, and Tamsin cut it exactly in half in front of them with a flourish like a magician. They clapped as if she'd sought a woman in a box. For a minute, the room felt like it belonged to every good day she'd ever had. When she got home, the power in her building was out. The hallway glowed with the kind of emergency light that makes everyone look like they have a secret. Tamsin used the flashlight on her phone to climb the stairs. In her apartment, she lit a candle that had been sitting in a drawer for months waiting to be useful, and the room turned into something gentler. Outside, the rain found its rhythm. She boiled water on the gas stove for tea and sat by the window with a book she'd read 3 times. The kind of book that makes you feel like your heart has trained for this, whatever this is. The next morning, a notice in the building's lobby announced that rents were going up again. The typeface was tidy and unconcerned. Tamsin ran the numbers twice and then a third time as if math might show mercy for good behavior. It didn't. She could make it work if she added another shift and cut back on. She looked around her apartment and tried to identify what could be cut back on when everything already felt like the barest version of itself. She turned the notice over, wrote, "Trust the small things," and stuck it to the fridge beside the old note, a duet of reminders. Winter this time found her tired in the corners. She smiled anyway. It wasn't a lie, it was a choice. The library started a food drive, and Tamsin organized the volunteers on her off days, building small assembly lines of generosity that felt like choreography. Porter the dishwasher brought in 3 cans of beans and apologized that it wasn't more. Tamsin shook her head, touched the cans like they were rare minerals, and said, "You brought 3 dinners." His shoulders squared by a centimeter. Inches add up to miles. In March, an older woman slipped on the diner's stoop. Tamsin was there before the O. finished leaving the woman's mouth. She crouched, asked careful questions, and held the hand that needed holding. The EMTs later told Leon that her quick pressure on the wrist likely kept a fracture from becoming a surgery. Leon ordered a first aid class for the staff and installed a mat at the entrance, then put the receipt on the fridge in the break room like a trophy. Tamsin pinned underneath it a flyer for a community CPR training and paid for 3 spots out of her tip jar. "You can't train luck," she told Chewy, "but you can invite it." More years, more Tuesdays, more pies. In the unseen margins of things, Tamsin kept doing the work nobody names. When Mr. Alvarez and 3B had a stroke, she was the one who found the emergency contact wedged behind a ceramic rooster and called his sister. When a young woman at the bus stop cried without seeming to realize it, Tamsin sat next to her and learned the art of handing over a napkin without a lecture. When the Night Falcon, now 7 and wearing a more serious cape, asked if superheroes ever get afraid, she leaned on the counter and said, "Especially then." She didn't know that some mornings begin assembling their own future thank yous long before anyone tells them to. She didn't know that kindness, when repeated under pressure, turns into something like a law. You can live a life and not know what it's adding up to until someone brings you the sum. The diner got a new owner when she was 35, and with him came a new menu printed on thick paper that made everything look both fancier and less specific. The prices climbed. The lemon wedges shrank. The owner said, "Upsell the mains," and Tamsin learned to say house potatoes instead of fries, though she still whispered the old names like nicknames to the people who preferred things the way they were. She trained 3 new servers in 5 months and realized she liked teaching as much as doing. Leon watched her with a worry he thought was subtle. "You could manage here," he said one night while they were counting the drawer. "I could put your name on the schedule in a bold font. Give you keys." Tamsin smiled. Bold font, huh? Seriously, he said. You already run the place when it matters. I just sign things. She looked at the freezer door, at the way it never closed quite right, at the busser hauling an overloaded tub, at Chewy rubbing his shoulder where the tendon nagged. She thought about how many of her days had been spent catching small falling things before they shattered. Sometimes you don't want keys to a door you're always fixing. Sometimes you want to build a door that doesn't pinch anyone's fingers when it swings. I'll think about it, she said, and meant it in the way you do when your mind is already sketching something you can't see yet. Spring came back with its green insistence. Tamsin started walking in the mornings before her shifts, a slow loop through the neighborhood that taught her every crack in the sidewalk like a neighbor's dog. She listened to people tell their lives into their phones, voices floating by like balloons that forgot their strings. She nodded at the woman with the prayer shirt. The plant on her balcony had resurrected itself. At the library food drive, a man in a suit stopped by and asked a few polite, odd questions, then left a card that said Founders Fellowship, microgrants for community problem solvers. Tamsin wiped her hands, took the card home, and set it beside her old letter. She read the fellowship description twice at the kitchen table while pasta water boiled and remembered the volunteer with the notebook from years ago. Maybe not all clipboards were selling. Maybe some were collecting maps. That night she wrote an application with the same care she used to balance plates on a crowded arm, a plan for a neighborhood skills exchange that traded time instead of money. An hour of tutoring for an hour of carpentry. A ride to the clinic for help filling out a form. A set of grocery shelves for a crochet lesson. She called it the trade win because she liked how that sounded like weather that helped. She hit submit and felt ridiculous and brave in precisely equal measure. Weeks passed. Pancakes flipped. Night Falcon lost a tooth and presented it to her in a napkin like an award. Tamsin stopped thinking about the application until an email arrived with a subject line that made her stomach drop, "Congratulations." She read it standing in the walk-in fridge to cool her face, then laughed alone among the lettuces. The grant wasn't grand, but it was enough to rent the community room at the library twice a week, print flyers, buy a lockbox and a little bell. Enough to start. The first night of Trade Wind, 8 people came, then 11, then 20. Tamsin watched strangers teach each other and felt something inside her align. Porter showed a teenager how to fix a bike chain. Mrs. Klein taught 3 dads to read bedtime stories like actors. The old man who nursed his oatmeal brought a toolkit and repaired a woman's lamp while she braided hair for a second grader's picture day. Nobody asked for money, everybody left richer. Tamsin slept like a good idea. Months passed in that full, humming way good work does. She split herself between the diner and the trade wind and the library's Saturday morning story time, and she didn't break. She began taking a community college class in nonprofit basics on Wednesday nights, where she learned that the things she had been doing by instinct had names. She wrote them in a notebook with neat letters and underlined the ones that felt like they had been following her for years. "Why don't you quit the diner?" Porter asked one night while they closed down, his voice pitched between worry and wish. "Because it's where they find me," she said, surprised at how true it sounded. He nodded as if she'd answered a different question he hadn't asked yet. On a Sunday afternoon in late summer, Tamsin stopped by the grocery store after a trade wind session to buy bananas and tea bags. In the cereal aisle, she saw a young man studying a box like he'd been told it held an instruction manual for his life. He had the posture of someone who'd learned to stand between a small person and a large problem. The image flared in her mind and faded, leaving a warmth that surprised her. He looked up, and for a breath, she thought she knew him. But he turned away to the shelf, picked the cereal, and the moment slipped into the inventory of almosts. Life was like that, your past walking by in shoes you didn't recognize, your future waving from the end of an aisle while you debated brand names. The first winter of the trade wind, as snow worried the edges of the library windows, a woman in a crisp suit came to observe. She asked polite questions and watched Tamsin move through the room like a quiet conductor. At the end, she handed Tamsin an envelope with a card, Community Impact Fund Dinner, 2 tickets. "No pressure," the woman said. "Just come and eat rubber chicken with people who sometimes write checks." Tamsin nearly didn't go. The dress in her closet had done weddings and job interviews and didn't want to do one more thing. But Mrs. Klein insisted, pinned Tamsin's hair up herself, and said, "You don't go to be impressed. You go to be remembered." The dinner was what those dinners are, polite, overlit, full of phrases like leveraging partnerships and synergy that made Tamsin want to check on pies. But she told the story of the trade win to a table of people who sliced their chicken as if success were meat you could cut with a knife, and they listened. On the way out, a man at the coat check said he liked her idea and might stop by on Tuesday with his son's broken skateboard. She said, "We have glue and opinions." He laughed like he hadn't done that in a while. The next Tuesday, the man appeared with a kid whose haircut made him look like he was starting a band. They stayed an hour. The man returned the next week without the skateboard and sat with a woman who needed help writing a letter to her landlord. He put a business card in the lockbox with a donation that felt like the first brick of a new wall. He shook Tamsin's hand like a promise. By spring, the library was almost too small, and Tamsin started eyeing the old print shop on Maple that had been dark for 5 years. It had wide windows and a concrete floor that didn't mind a mess. The rent made her stomach clench, but the idea of a place open every day, where people could wander in without an appointment and be met by a person who knew how to listen, that idea made something inside her build scaffolding. She drew up a plan on graph paper like she'd seen carpenters do, tables here, tools there, a shelf of binders labeled with skills and interests like the phone book of a friend you never lost. She brought the plan to the bank and felt the loan officer's eyes catch on the numbers. He wanted to say no nicely. He wore a tie that looked like it apologized for him. Tamsin left with a stack of forms and a calm that surprised her. Not yet wasn't the same as never. The diner hummed. Life went on. One hot afternoon, the woman in the crisp suit returned with a partner and asked if Tamsin would consider a larger grant that came with support services. Tamsin said she would consider anything that came with honest paperwork and no hidden strings. The woman laughed and said, "We're trying to be the opposite of strings." They came by the trade wind 4 more times. People noticed. A rumor grew yeast in the corner, that Tamsin might get the space on Maple, that maybe she'd turn her quiet idea into a loud building. And then, one morning in late June, 15 summers after a girl and a boy ate cloud pancakes and tried not to exist, Tamsin woke before her alarm. The day had a feeling that reminded her of Christmas mornings when she was small, the air in the room a fraction brighter than it had to be. She dressed in clean jeans and a pale button-down, laced her shoes, and tucked her old letter into her bag without opening it. Trust the small things, it had told her for years. Today she would ask something large to behave. She worked the breakfast shift with a steadiness that felt like an engine in tune. Night Falcon, now taller, cape-retired, braces flashing righteous light, came in with his grandmother and ordered waffles like a person applying for a passport. He was going to middle school in the fall. Tamsin wrote a note on his receipt that said you can do hard things and watched him fold it and put it into his wallet like a bill. The old man at the counter ate oatmeal without reading. He looked better now, like grief had begun to set down its boxes. At 10:45, a lull. Tamsin slipped into the back, washed her hands twice, and checked her phone. The grant committee's decision would come via email. She had practiced not checking, had practiced trusting that the future would arrive whether or not she stared at the door. She set the phone down, exhaled, and went back to pour coffee for the guy with the construction boots who always left exact change in a quarter, as if tipping were an equation. Just after 11, the bell above the diner door chimed, and the air changed the way rooms do when someone walks in who belongs to your past without warning you. Tamsin turned with the coffee pot midair. 2 people stood by the pie case, a young woman with hair the color of brewed tea and a young man with the kind of posture you earn by carrying things for other people for a long time. Booth or counter? Tamsin asked automatically, the pot heavy, the world suddenly very, very light. The young woman smiled like she had practiced it in the mirror on a day she wanted to get it right. Hi, she said, voice traveling from far away and arriving exactly in front of Tamsin. Cloud pancakes? Tamsin blinked. The coffee in the pot steadied. The young man cleared his throat, not to speak, but to make space for words that were crowding each other. He held out a small paper bag, the kind the diner used for takeout sandwiches. On the front, a child's wobbly hand had written "Thank you." The marker had bled a little into the paper like emotion always does into time. 15 years late, he said, and there it was, Luca's voice folded into a grown one. We had to grow into it. Tamsin felt something rise in her chest and stand on tiptoe. She set the coffee down before she put it in the wrong place. "Ada," she said to the young woman. Ada laughed, and it was the same sound, a careful joy that had learned how not to check over its shoulder. "Yes," she said. "Yes." For a moment they just looked. The room crowded and then stepped back. The old man at the counter turned his face toward the window to give the scene privacy. Chewie peeked from the kitchen and disappeared like a cat. Leon froze mid-inventory of sugar packets and then remembered to count. And then time remembered itself, and Tamsin had an order pad in her hand and a question on her face. "Booth," she said, and her voice came out steady. "We have a booth that catches the good light." They sat, and she poured water, and the three of them did the awkward ritual strangers do when they are not strangers at all. Ada touched the edge of her glass with her fingertip, as if to verify that it was real and cold. Luca's eyes kept doing the protective sweep and returning to Tamsin like a pendulum. "Cloud pancakes," Ada said finally, and Tamsin wrote it down even though she didn't need to. "And coffee." "Black." "Pancakes for you too?" Tamsin asked Luca. He nodded. "With blueberries," he said, and the word came out the same way it had once landed on a plate, tentative, then sure. In the kitchen, Chewie didn't need a ticket. He flipped batter with ceremony and slid the pancakes onto the plates like he was delivering a crown. Tamsin carried them out with a gravity that felt like walking with a bowl of water filled exactly to the brim. They ate. They told her about years without making a list of injuries. They told her only what she needed to know to understand the shape of the path without counting every stone. A shelter for a while. A foster home that was safe and then gone. A teacher who noticed. A friend's mother who put a hand on a shoulder and didn't take it away when things were loud. A tiny apartment with a lock that kept its promises. A scholarship. A job. Another job. A life building itself without asking anyone for permission. Tamsin listened and put coffee where it needed to be. She asked one or two questions that had no sharp edges. She laughed at a joke Luca made about canned soup and how opening it used to sound like a fire alarm in his chest. She blinked hard when Ada described learning how to sleep without her shoes on. "We thought about coming back sooner," Ada said, pushing a blueberry to the edge of the plate with the tip of her fork. "But we didn't want to show up empty-handed." "Empty-handed is still a hand," Tamsin said. Ada looked at her like that sentence might be worth putting in a wallet. "We brought something anyway," she said. "But not yet. We wanted to see if you were still you." Tamsin smiled. "I tried not to change the parts that mattered." They stayed for an hour that felt like a chapter. When they left, they hugged her with a gentleness that reminded her of the first time you learn a door opens more easily if you pull instead of push. Ada whispered, "We'll come by later. We have a thing." Tamsin nodded as if mysterious things walked in and out of her days all the time. Maybe they did. After they left, Tamsin stood in the doorway for a moment with her order pad closed like a book you don't want to finish. She looked at the paper bag they had left on the table, the thank you bleeding into the paper. Inside was a photograph, two kids at a diner table with clouds on their plates, their faces turned toward a woman you couldn't see because she was the person holding the camera of the room. On the back, in neat capital letters, someone had written, "We made it." The rest of the shift happened with the bright quiet that follows a good storm. Leon tried to ask who they were and then decided he didn't need to know. Chewie wiped his eyes when nobody was looking and said the onions were fresh today. At 3, Tamsin took off her apron and stepped into the summer air. The city sounded like a radio station between songs, static and promise. She walked to the bus stop with the photograph in her bag and the old letter beside it, both of them paper but not at all the same weight. When she reached her building, she paused on the stairs to read her email. the Community Impact Fund had written at exactly 2:55 p.m. The subject line said, "Welcome home." The message was short and kind. They were offering her the grant, larger than she'd expected, with a mentorship she didn't know how to name, her gratitude for, and a lease on the print shop on Maple if she wanted it. If she wanted it. The words glowed like they had been waiting for her to arrive. She sat on the steps and let the relief move through her like sunlight. She sent one text to Mrs. Klein, "Got IT," and turned off her phone so the moment could fit. People passed her on the sidewalk carrying bags with their dinners already half decided. The woman on the balcony watered a plant that forgave everything. Somewhere, a siren began and finished its sentence. Upstairs, she made tea because that was what she did when the world asked for ceremony. She pulled the old letter from her bag and finally opened it. The page smelled like time. She read the words 19-year-old Tamsin had written and smiled at the person who had known what she wanted without knowing how to say it. "Open when you forget why," it had said. She hadn't forgotten. But it felt like a blessing anyway, to have someone who was her and wasn't her hand her a compass and point. At 6:20, a text buzzed on her phone from an unknown number. "Outside?" It included a little car emoji that looked like a joke until it wasn't. Tamsin stood, wiped her hands on her jeans as if she'd been making bread, and opened her apartment door. The hallway smelled like dinner and laundry and someone's new shampoo. She walked down the stairs with the kind of curious calm you get when you suspect good things might be possible. On the sidewalk, the air held that end-of-day pleasure like the world had loosened its tie. Parked at the curb in front of her building was a car so sleek it looked like someone had drawn it with a single confident line. The paint had the kind of shine that made the whole street lean over it to admire itself. A driver in a dark suit stood by the rear door with his hands folded, wearing the practiced neutrality of someone whose job was to look like furniture even when he was made of breathing. The rear window lowered a fraction, just enough to draw a shape in the air. Tamsin saw the suggestion of a face and the glint of something like a smile. Her heart did a quiet rearrangement. 1,000 tiny kindnesses, balanced on each other, made a tower. At the top, someone had placed a call bell. The bell had rung. "Miss Cole?" the driver asked. His voice had the gentle authority of a good librarian. "We're here to take you to dinner." Tamsin looked behind her, as if there might be another Miss Cole who had ordered this moment by mistake. There wasn't. The street was her street, the door was her door, the car was not her car, and all of it was real. She stepped closer, saw her own face reflected in the door, soft around the eyes from a lot of smiles and not enough sleep. "Who?" she began, and then she saw it, a small paper bag propped on the leather seat inside, the old diner stamp on the front, the words "Thank you" written in new, deliberate strokes. The driver opened the door the rest of the way, and the city seemed to hush, like a room when a curtain rises. Tamsin took a breath that felt like forward. She put one foot over the threshold in. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. And sat down into a future she hadn't planned to enter. The door thudded softly behind her, muffling the city to a far-off hush. Leather held the cool of evening, the cabin smelled faintly of cedar and something floral like a memory that had done well for itself. Ada sat on the far side of the back seat, her hands folded over a small clutch, the same careful poise Tamsin remembered wrapped now in a woman who had practiced standing tall. Luca sat beside her, shoulders broad with the kind of strength that comes from carrying not just boxes but years. The driver stepped away from the door like a curtain easing back into place. "Hi," Ada said, a little breathlessly, like this was a scene she'd rehearsed and was still surprised to find real. "Thank you for trusting the unknown." "I do that a lot," Tamsin said, and smiled because it was true. The car pulled from the curb as smoothly as a decision finally made. Streetlights slid along the windows in even intervals, beads on a string. Tamsin glanced out and recognized her block moving past with its chip-painted railing and the wild geranium that had made a jailbreak from Mr. Alvarez's pot. This was her old life passing the baton to the new one, polite and a little stunned. "We wanted to take you to dinner," Luca said. "And to a place." He exchanged a quick look with Ada, a conversation's worth condensed into a nod. But first, we wanted to say something we didn't know how to say at 11 and 9. You already thanked me, Tamsin said softly. Now for the pancakes, Ada said. For changing the way hunger sounded. She held Tamsin's gaze. After you, hunger stopped sounding like shame. It sounded like a problem we could get help solving. Tamsin swallowed. I only did what anyone should have done. Ada's smile tilted. Maybe. But you were the one who did. Traffic thinned as the car climbed toward a part of the city that wore its money like an accent. Buildings grew taller, glassier, sidewalks widened their shoulders. Tamsin glanced at her shoes and then out at the world and felt something like humility and defiance settle into a truce inside her. She had walked sidewalks too narrow for hope and had still found ways to pass. Wide ones didn't scare her. Where are we going? She asked. A dinner, Luca said. But we're early on purpose. He tapped the glass. The driver inclined his head and turned down a side street lined with old trees that had refused to yield their posts to parking meters. They stopped before a building that looked like a thoughtful person had designed it, brick with modern windows, old soul, new spine. Above the door, letters in brushed steel spelled something Tamsin couldn't read from this angle. Ada reached for Tamsin's hand. Before we explain, we need you to see. They stepped out. Evening gathered politely around them. Inside, the lobby glowed warm, the kind of light that makes people look like they grew up loved. A woman at the desk smiled and said, "Welcome," like she had been waiting all day for this exact configuration of faces. Elevator? Luca asked, and the woman nodded as if directions were unnecessary for people who already knew where they were going. Inside the car, Ada pressed 4. The doors closed with a sigh, and for a moment Tamsin was just breath and heartbeat and the vast uncertainty that comes before a surprise. When the doors slid open, a hallway stretched ahead, its floor polished concrete, its walls a gallery of photographs, people bent over projects, hands teaching other hands, a kid holding a skateboard aloft like a trophy, a row of crockpots at what looked like a community dinner, a librarian laughing so hard she had to hold her sides. The images felt like a language she'd been learning for years. A set of double doors stood halfway down. On the glass, white vinyl letters spelled, "The Trade Wind, Skills Exchange and Community Workshop." Beneath, in smaller type, a program of the Cole Foundation. Tamsin froze. For a moment, the world narrowed to a single word, Cole. It belonged to her the way scars belonged to the body that healed around them, not as decoration, but as proof. She managed, then didn't. Luca pushed the doors open. Inside, the old print shop on Maple had been remade without losing its memory. Sun-high windows stood along one wall. Work tables stood like islands in a friendly archipelago. Pegboards held tools that would rather be used than admired. A corner near the front had been staged like a living room, thrift store couch dignified by clean cushions, a rug that had decided to pull colors into a conversation. Along the back ran shelves of binders labeled in neat hands, rides, forms, math help, mechanics, cooking, childcare swaps, resumes, translation, first aid, legal clinic Thursdays. Near the entrance sat a little desk with a bell and a lockbox and a sign that read, "We trade time here. Bring what you know." Tamsin stepped forward like she might wake the room if she moved too quickly. Her hand brushed the nearest table, as if to greet it. The air held the dust of sawdust and copy paper and coffee, a smell that made her eyes sting with a feeling that didn't have a tidy box. In the far corner, a glass-walled office held a corkboard dense with index cards and names, a calendar so alive with ink it looked like a field in bloom. Above the board hung a framed photograph, Tamsin at the diner, pouring coffee, her smile caught mid-tilt. Under it, the caption, "Trust the small things." "How?" she whispered. Ada's laugh came out wobbly. "We came to Trade Wind the second week it opened," she said. "We didn't say hello because we were shy and because you were moving in 12 directions making 14 people feel like they were the only person in the room." She glanced at Luca. "We stayed. A lot. We learned bike repair, and then I helped fix a dryer, Luca said. Ada edited resumes, and a guy taught her how to use a router, woodshop, not internet. His grin flashed. We watched what you were building and we thought, this is how the world should work. We didn't have money then, Ada said. We had time. We traded. We saved. And then the world kept surprising us. Scholarships and jobs and people who believed we could do more than we'd been told. She looked at Tamsin as if to apologize for the velocity of their story. We started a tiny fund in our heads first. We called it Cloud Pancakes, because of course we did. The name didn't survive legal, but the feeling did. We found people who wanted to help, Luca said. One of them had a building. Another had a grant. A bunch had skills. We had a list of reasons why you were the person to trust with all of it. Ada's eyes shone. We hoped you'd say yes. So we did some things assuming you would. She gestured around. If that's too much, we will undo every assumption and apologize with cake. Tamsin turned in a slow circle. Every corner of the room felt like something she'd imagined in the tired minutes between shifts and then told to behave. The bell on the front desk winked at her. She took one step, then another, until she stood behind the desk where a laminated sheet lay waiting, opening checklist. Beside it, a keyring sat on a small dish labeled, Keys for Tam. Her name on a dish. The keys had that satisfying weight a yes carries. She put her hand on the keys but didn't lift them yet. What is the Cole Foundation? She asked, the words careful. It's us, Ada said, and the word is hung there with more furniture in it than it usually wears. We thought about all the people who helped us become people who could help, and we wanted to braid that into something that could pull. We put our names on the papers because someone had to, but it's not a vanity. It's a direction. Also, Luca said, people take calls from something that sounds like a thing. He shrugged. Phones are weird that way. Tamsin laughed, and the sound filled the room like it had been missing from the inventory. She picked up the keys and felt the tug at her chest where old fear sleeps. This is big, she said. Big is often full of corners. It is, Ada said quietly. We don't expect you to take it because of us. We expect you to take it if it fits the work you're already doing. Leon will say I'm running away, Tamsin said. Leon will say he always knew you'd run something, Ada corrected gently. People who count the drawers know what walks out with the receipts and what walks in with the open sign. They stood together in the middle of the room and let the air settle around them like a shirt pulled on over damp skin. Tamsin walked the perimeter, touching each idea as if blessing it. At the library corner, she found a laminated flyer for Saturday story time with a photograph of Night Falcon at 5, Cape Askew, grin unstoppable. She brushed the edge with her finger and felt the world present her a circle closed without fanfare. Dinner? Luca prompted finally. If I leave now, I'll just sit and cry over salad, Tamsin said, smiling at the imagined scene. Let me cry here for a minute instead. They waited without fidgeting, the kind of kindness you offer someone unwrapping the life they accidentally built right. When she had breathed herself steady, they took the elevator down and the car carried them through streets that looked different now, because once you see a door with your name by it, even the alleyways look like invitations. The restaurant sat on a corner that had decided to be important. Inside, lighting conspired to make conversations feel confidential and glasses chimed with modest self-satisfaction. They were early but not the first. A banner near the back announced, Community Impact Dinner. Tamsin recognized the woman with the crisp suit and the man from the coat check who'd brought his son's skateboard. Mrs. Klein stood near the dessert table pretending not to guard the lemon bars with her life. Porter waved from beside a cluster of people who looked like they were trying to make sense of a grant application written in kindness instead of jargon. Surprise, Ada whispered. We didn't tell you everyone was going to be here because you would have worried about ice. How did you? Tamsin began, and then didn't bother. Of course. People who had been children with contingency plans grown into adults who could get people into rooms. A short program began. Words were said about leverage and partnership, but then the woman in the crisp suit did a thing that made Tamsin like her more. She set down her notes, looked out at the room, and told a small story about a night she watched a server divide one slice of pie perfectly in front of two men who had both asked for it. "Fair," the woman said, "looks beautiful when it's done right." They called Tamsin's name. Applause rose in that way applause does when it recognizes itself in the person it's for. She walked to the front with knees that remembered being young and broken, stubborn and scared and brave. The presenter held out an envelope with the word yes on it in a font so clean it felt honest. The grant inside matched the email. The mentorship came with office hours and a person you could text when the copier jammed, not with paper but with fear. The lease for the maple space lay under it with terms that had been bent toward mercy. "Speech?" the woman asked. Tamsin looked out and saw a city she'd been offering small steadinesses to for years, offering its hands back. She kept it short. "We're not building something new," she said. "We're making a room for what people already know how to do for each other." She glanced at Ada and Luca and felt a heat behind her eyes she agreed to ignore. "If you have time, bring it. If you need time, ask. If this feels too simple to matter, you're exactly the kind of person who should come see it." Afterward, the dinner turned into a fair with better clothing. People came up with questions and offers and stories that began with "I've been thinking." The man with the skateboard son volunteered Saturday mornings. A woman who ran a small legal clinic offered Thursdays. A retired carpenter said he had a shop full of tools that wanted new hands. At the end, when the room finally recognized it had become tomorrow, Tamsin found a quiet corner by a window and let herself look out at the city. Ada joined her, then Luca. The three of them stood like people do in hospital waiting rooms when they are exhausted by good news. "Come outside," Luca said at last. "One more thing." "Oh no," Tamsin said. "If this is a pony, it's a hard no." He laughed. "No livestock." They stepped into the gentle shock of cooler air. The driver had pulled the car around but stood a few paces off, looking at a sky that had decided to keep its stars to itself tonight. Parked beside the car was a second vehicle, not as sleek, practical in a way that felt like a compliment. It was a van, the kind with wide doors and anchors for shelves. Its paint was a calm blue. On the side, in clean letters, "Tradewind Mobile, we come to you." On the back door, smaller, "In memory of those who fed us when we were hungry." Tamsin lifted a hand to her mouth. "We kept thinking," Ada said quietly. "Not everyone can get to Maple. But we can get to them. Schools. Shelters. Apartment courtyards where the elevators don't always work. We outfitted it with what you told that guy from the bank," Luca added. "Except we actually listened." He opened the back to reveal shelves with bins labeled with the same neat hand as the binders inside: basic tools, first aid, paperwork help, childcare corner, lap desks, portable lights. A folding table lived against one wall like a useful friend. A small bulletin board bore a laminated sheet with a map of the city in pins and colors that had chosen themselves. "We wanted to give you keys tonight," Ada said. "We wanted you to know you don't have to choose between where you've been useful and where you will be." Tamsin took the van keys, their weight different from the others but speaking the same language. She imagined the routes they would draw across neighborhoods like stitches pulled from one good scene to another. She imagined Night Falcon in 3 years volunteering to teach younger kids how to tightrope across middle school. She imagined Mrs. Alvarez teaching empanadas on a folding table under a tree. She imagined a carpenter setting up sawhorses for a boy who had never been allowed to touch anything sharp before and saying, "Here, this is how you begin." "I should tell Leon," she said, and the "should" carried love in it, not dread. "I don't want him to find out from a flyer." "We called him," Ada said. "He said if you didn't take this, he would fire you and then hire you back out of spite." "That sounds like him," Tamsin said, and laughed a sound that knew him well. "He loves a dramatic HR gesture." They drove back toward her street. The city had shifted closer in the way it does when your place in it becomes less borrowed and more built. The car stopped at her building, but the block didn't look like itself. Neighbors stood on stoops pretending to do nothing in particular. Kids chalked on the sidewalk words that looked like celebrations in a language invented an hour ago. Night Falcon, capeless now, but with the same lilt to his chin, held a stack of cupcakes with the grim determination of a person carrying something valuable past gravity. Mrs. Klein stood with Mr. Alvarez, whose sister had flown in and now wore the building like a place she'd always meant to visit. Even Leon was there, holding a plant that looked nervous about being in public. "What did you do?" Tamsin asked, breathless. "Nothing," Ada said. "We told 3 people. 3 is the number that turns a thought into a parade." They climbed the steps. Someone had strung lights from the fire escape to the opposite building in that miraculous way lights get strung when no one has a permit but everyone has a ladder. As Tamsin reached her door, the driver placed an envelope in her hand. It had weight without bulk. Inside lay a deed, not for her apartment, not for something as impossible as that, but for a lease transferred at $1 a year for the storefront next to the diner, donated by a landlord who had been trying for a decade to be the kind of man his children could brag about. It would become a satellite of trade wind, a place for people who had 15 minutes on a lunch break in one complicated question. "Too much?" Luca asked, hope and worry blowing across his face like weather. Tamsin shook her head. "The right amount," she said. "I'm just not used to math doing this much good at once." Ada squeezed her hand. "You did the long addition," she said. "We're just carrying the ones." The crowd brightened without getting louder. In the middle of it, a kid began to play saxophone from 3B, a shy tune that lifted its head and found out it could sing. Someone started passing paper cups of lemonade with mint leaves like courage. Chewy whispered to the air about onions. Tamsin turned toward her door and then paused, sensing a shift that didn't come from the crowd. The down-the-block hiss of tires over wet asphalt. A familiar tinkle of a bell she had known longer than any other sound in this city. She looked up the street. A second car, sleek, black, not the same, rolled to a slow stop at the curb. The driver stayed inside. The rear window lowered exactly an inch, old theater in a new city. In the narrow dark space, a pair of eyes watched, evaluating. The car idled like a held breath. No one else seemed to notice. The crowd's attention was on cupcakes and saxophones and a future that had the decency to arrive wearing jeans. Ada's smile faltered. Luca went very still, the way he had that first morning when he'd positioned himself between a girl and the world. The hairs on Tamsin's arms rose like grass in a wind you can't see yet. "Do you know them?" Tamsin asked, low. Ada's voice was almost steady. "We might," she said. "We hoped we wouldn't." The window slid down another inch. A man's hand appeared, expensive watch, careful ring, holding an envelope the color of money you're not supposed to talk about. The hand tapped the edge of the window once, twice, a signal that sounded like history knocking. Luca stepped forward before he thought. The car's engine deepened, the acoustic animal in machines that means don't. He stopped. The envelope slid inward, the window glided up, the car pulled from the curb with etiquette and intent, its taillights winking once as if to say, "To be continued." A hush ran through the block like a rumor learning to walk. Tamsin tucked the van keys into her pocket and squared her shoulders, the way you do when the small things you've trusted introduce you to a larger fight. She turned to Ada and Luca. "Who was?" A phone buzzed in Ada's clutch, urgent as a doorbell. She looked down. Her face changed shape. "What is it?" Tamsin asked. Ada raised her eyes. "The lease," she said. "For Maple. The bank just flagged a problem. Someone's filed a claim on the building's title. They're trying to stop us from opening." The saxophone faltered mid-note. Night Falcon tightened his grip on the cupcakes as if they were ballast. Somewhere in the distance, a siren found its key. Tamsin looked at the van, at the street, at the faces she knew how to steady. She looked toward the direction the car had gone and felt what it feels like when a life that is trained in kindness suddenly requires strategy. She reached for her phone, for the list of people who answered when she called. She reached for the new keys, heavy with tomorrow. "Okay," she said, her voice the kind that quiets rooms and gathers tools. Then we start now. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.